My mom called me on a Thursday morning. I was standing in the kitchen of the house I had lived in for 7 months, the house my grandfather had left me, in his will, signed, notarized, filed with the county. I had my coffee in my hand. The morning light was coming through the window the way it always did on clear days in October. That specific kind of light that makes everything look a little warmer than it is. And my mother said, and I am going to quote this exactly because I wrote it down the moment the call ended, "You have 48 hours to get your things out. We're selling the house. This was never supposed to be yours alone." I did not say anything for 4 seconds. I counted them. Not because I was shocked, because I had been waiting for this call for 7 months. And I wanted to remember exactly how it felt when it finally came. What happened in the next 11 days is why you're here. Welcome. Today's story comes from Reddit. And before we go any further, I need to tell you something. This is not a story about a house. I know the title makes it sound like a property dispute, a family fight over an inheritance, a legal question about who owns what. It is all of those things. But underneath all of it, it is a story about a question that doesn't get asked out loud nearly enough. What happens when the person who raised you decides that love is a debt you owe them? And what do you do when the bill finally arrives? Reddit had a lot to say. I have more. And by the time we get to what she said on day 11, I think you'll understand exactly why this story stayed in the top 10 on the legal advice subreddit for 6 straight days. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's call her Claire. Claire was 29 years old when her grandfather passed away. She had been close to him in a way that is hard to describe to people who didn't grow up with a grandparent like that. The kind of person who showed up, not for the big moments only, for the ordinary Tuesdays. The phone calls that weren't about anything. The Saturday mornings that turned into whole afternoons without either of you planning it. Her grandfather, she writes, was the first person in her family who had ever made her feel like her presence was something that was wanted, and not something that needed to be managed. He had been a quiet man, a practical man, the kind of man who didn't say things he didn't mean, and who, when he said something, meant it completely. He had told her, 4 years before he died, that the house would be hers. They were sitting on the back porch of that house on a Sunday afternoon. She had just gone through a difficult breakup, had driven 2 hours to see him without telling anyone she was coming. He had not asked questions, had made coffee, had sat with her in the way he always sat with her, which was fully present and completely without pressure. He had said, somewhere in the middle of the second hour of that afternoon, "Claire, when I'm gone, this house is yours. I've already talked to my lawyer. I want you to have somewhere that's just yours." She had told him not to talk like that. He smiled and said, "I'm not talking like anything. I'm making a plan." He was a practical man. 4 years later, the plan was in the will. The house, a 3-bedroom property in a mid-sized town in the Midwest, was left to Claire, solely, specifically, with language that her grandfather's attorney had been very deliberate about. Because, and this detail matters, her grandfather had known exactly what he was doing and had known exactly who might object. He had known because he had watched his daughter, Claire's mother, manage people and situations and outcomes for 30 years. He had loved his daughter, and he had known exactly what she was capable of. Claire found this out later, but we'll get there. The will was read on a Wednesday in January. Claire's mother sat across the table in the attorney's office and was silent through the entire reading. Not the good kind of silent. The kind of silent that is the very first stage of something else. When the attorney finished, her mother said, "That can't be right." The attorney said it was correct. Her mother said, "He would have discussed this with the family." The attorney said the will had been in place for 4 years and had been updated 18 months prior, which was well within the period when her father had been fully competent and legally clear to make such decisions. Her mother said, "I'd like a copy of everything." She said it quietly, politely, with a smile that Claire recognized immediately. It was the smile her mother used when she had decided something. On the drive home, her mother said very little. She asked Claire if she was planning to move in. Claire said she was. Her mother nodded, said, "We'll talk about this." Claire said, "Okay." She did not think in that moment that there was much to talk about. She was wrong. She moved into the house in March. It took her 2 weeks to stop feeling like a guest in it. The house still smelled like her grandfather. Not in a sad way. In the way that certain places hold the presence of the people who loved them. The particular wood of the floors. The old paint on the windowsills. The small garden in the back that he had kept up every spring until his hands couldn't manage it anymore. She started learning the garden, one video at a time. She painted the hallway a color she had been thinking about for years. a soft green that she had never been able to use in any of the apartments she'd rented because it would have required permission from a landlord. She didn't need anyone's permission here. That was still new enough to feel remarkable. Her mother called twice a week. The calls were careful at first, surface level. How was the house? Was she settling in? Had she found someone to look at the furnace? But underneath the careful calls, Claire could feel something building. Her mother was a woman who had built her life on a very specific idea of how families were supposed to work, which was that they moved together, that decisions were shared, that anything one person had was, in some essential way, available to all of them. It was not a malicious idea, exactly. It was just an idea that had never once asked whether everyone in the family agreed to those terms. The first real conversation happened in April. Her mother came to visit, walked through the house with a particular kind of attention that wasn't admiration. The kind that was inventory. She stood in the living room and said, "Your uncle thinks this could sell for quite a bit right now." Claire said, "I'm not selling." Her mother said, "No one said you had to. I'm just saying the market is good." Claire said, "Mom, I'm not selling Grandpa's house." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It's not just Grandpa's house anymore, sweetheart. It's an asset. It's part of the family." And there it was. The first time those words appeared. Part of the family. Claire heard them, filed them away, said nothing. By June, her mother had said some version of that phrase 11 times. Claire had been counting. She was not someone who reacted. She was someone who observed. She had learned this skill slowly. Over 29 years of living inside a family where the loudest voice was usually her mother's, and where the loudest voice had a way of becoming the agreed-upon reality if you didn't pay very careful attention to the distance between what was said and what was true. She had learned to pay that kind of attention. And what she had observed in the 7 months between moving in and the Thursday phone call was a pattern. It started small. Her mother mentioning casually that her uncle had always loved the house. Then slightly less casually, that her uncle had actually expected to be included in the will. Then her aunt calling to say she hoped there were no hard feelings, but that the family had always assumed the house would be shared. Then her younger cousin, who she had never been particularly close to, texting to ask if she'd thought about renting out one of the rooms. Then her mother mentioning the market again. And again. And once more at Thanksgiving, in front of 4 other people, framed as a practical question about Claire's long-term financial planning. Claire had started a document. She titled it "What Has Been Said and When." By the time her mother called on that Thursday morning in October, the document had 23 entries. 7 months of a pattern, building slowly, the way her mother always built things. And when the call came and her mother said, "You have 48 hours to get your things out," Claire did not panic. She said, "Mom, I'll call you back." She hung up. She opened her document. She added entry 24, and then she called her grandfather's attorney. But before I tell you what happened on day 11, I want to tell you what happened in the days between. Because it wasn't just her mother, and what the rest of the family did in those 11 days is the part of the story that almost nobody in the comments addressed directly. But I think it's the most important part. Within 6 hours of her mother's call, her uncle had texted. He said he had heard there was a situation with the house and that he hoped it could be resolved without things getting complicated. She noticed the word complicated, the way it implied that complication would be her fault. She did not respond. The next morning, her aunt called. Her aunt was her mother's younger sister, a woman Claire had always experienced as warm and somewhat indirect. The kind of person who delivered difficult messages wrapped in enough softness that it took you a moment to understand what had actually been said. She said she was calling because she was worried. Said the family was going through a hard time. Said that losing Grandpa had been hard for everyone, especially Claire's mother, and that maybe Claire could find it in her heart to consider what this was doing to her mom. Claire asked what specifically her mother was suggesting should happen. Her aunt said, "Oh, I don't think she wants to force anything. She just wants the family to feel included." Claire said, "Included in what? It's my house. It's in the will." Her aunt paused, said, "Well, you know how she is." There it was. You know how she is. Claire had heard that phrase her entire life, had accepted it, for most of that life, as a complete explanation. As if the way someone was excused what they did when they were being that way. He was 29 now. She was sitting in the house her grandfather had left her. She was starting to find that explanation significantly less acceptable than she once had. On day 3, her cousin reached out. Not the one who had texted about the rooms. A different cousin. Older. Someone she had always looked up to. He said he'd heard what was going on and felt weird being caught in the middle. Said he didn't want to take sides. Said he hoped everyone could work it out. Claire said, "There aren't sides. There's a will. It's a legal document." Her cousin said, "Yeah, but you know how families are." She was beginning to notice how often people she loved were using the phrase, "you know how," as a substitute for a real position. On day 5, her mother sent a text. It said, "I've spoken to an attorney. You should know your options before you make decisions you can't take back." Claire read it 3 times. She noticed that it was framed as concern. She noticed that it also contained a threat. She noticed that her mother had done this her entire life, wrapped the threat inside the concern so completely that it was almost impossible to hold one without the other. She forwarded the text to her grandfather's attorney. On day 7, her mother called again. Claire let it go to voicemail. The voicemail said, "Claire, I know you're upset. I know this feels like I'm attacking you. I'm not. I'm your mother. I love you. But your grandfather was not thinking clearly when he made this decision, and I have people who will say so. I just want us to work this out before it becomes something none of us can come back from." Claire listened to it twice. She noticed 3 things. First, her mother had just implied her grandfather was not mentally competent when he made the will, which was the first time that specific claim had been stated out loud, though Claire had been watching it approach for weeks. Second, her mother had said, "I have people who will say so," which meant she had already been building something, already been making calls, already been preparing. Third, the last line, "before it becomes something none of us can come back from," which was, dressed up in the language of reconciliation, a warning. Claire opened her document, added entries 25, 26, and 27. Then she made a phone call. On day 9, a letter arrived. It was from an attorney she didn't recognize, representing her mother and her uncle jointly. It used words like undue influence and capacity concerns and equitable distribution among surviving family members. Claire read it once. Then she scanned it and sent it to her own attorney. Then she sat down at the kitchen table in her house. The one with the morning light she loved. The one with the garden that needed her. The one that still, 7 months in, sometimes caught her off guard with its specific smell of her grandfather's presence. She sat there for a while, and then she did what she had been preparing to do for 7 months. On day 11, she called her mother back. She had her document open on the laptop in front of her. She had spoken to her attorney twice that week. She knew exactly what she wanted to say and exactly how she wanted to say it. Her mother answered on the first ring. She said, "Claire," finally. Like Claire had been the one avoiding the conversation. Claire said, "Hi, Mom. I want to talk about the house." Her mother said she was glad. Said she hoped they could be reasonable about this. Said she knew it was hard, but that Grandpa hadn't understood the full picture when he made these decisions, and that the family just wanted what was fair. Claire said, "I want to read you something." Her mother said, "What?" Claire said, "I've been keeping notes since March. I want to read them to you." Silence. Claire read the document. All 27 entries. The first comment about the market in April. The visit where her mother walked through the house like it was an inventory. The 11 times some version of part of the family had been used to describe a house that was legally, solely, completely hers. The aunt's calls, the uncle's texts, the cousin who didn't want to take sides, the voicemail, the letter. She read all of it. Her mother was quiet for most of it. When Claire finished, she said, "Mom, I've been watching this for 7 months, and I want to ask you something directly. What specifically did I do wrong?" Her mother said she had taken something that belonged to the whole family. Claire said, "Grandpa left it to me, in a will, prepared by an attorney, updated 18 months before he died, when he was fully competent, which his doctor has already confirmed in writing to my attorney." Silence. Her mother said, "He was influenced." Claire said, "By who?" Her mother said, "By you. By the relationship you built with him." And Claire sat with that for a moment. Because what her mother had just said was that the relationship she had built with her grandfather, the Sunday afternoons, the phone calls, the showing up, the being present, the being someone he wanted to call on ordinary Tuesdays, that those things were now being called influence. That love in her mother's framework was a form of manipulation when it resulted in something her mother didn't control. Claire said very carefully, "Mom, I loved him, and he loved me. That's not influence. That's a relationship." Her mother said she was being naive. Claire said, "I have a letter from his attorney confirming that he discussed this decision with his legal counsel over a period of 4 years. I have documentation of his mental competency at the time of the most recent update. I have 27 entries in a document that show a 7-month pattern of pressure from this family to give up something that was legally left to me. And I have an attorney who has advised me that everything in that letter you sent has no legal standing." Silence. Longer this time. Her mother said, "So that's how you want to do this?" Claire said, "Mom, I don't want to do this any particular way. I want to live in the house Grandpa left me. I want to keep the garden. I want to call you on Sundays the way I always have." Those things are not in conflict with each other. They only become in conflict if you make them. Her mother said she couldn't believe this was the person she had raised, and Claire said quietly, "He taught me to keep records. He taught me to make plans. He taught me that the people who love you should be proud of you for those things, not threatened by them." Her mother hung up. Claire closed the document, set her phone on the table, looked out at the garden for a long time, and then she went outside and pulled some weeds, because October was not a month you wasted in the garden, and she had things to learn. The silence started within 24 hours. Her uncle stopped texting. The aunt, who had called twice, went quiet. 2 family members she had expected to hear from did not reach out. Her mother did not call on Sunday. For the first time in 11 years, her mother did not call on Sunday. Claire sat with that. It was heavier than she had expected, not because she was surprised, but because knowing something is coming and feeling it when it arrives are 2 entirely different things, and no amount of documentation prepares you for the specific weight of a Sunday afternoon without a call from your mother. She did not call her either. Her cousin, the older one, the one who had said he didn't want to take sides, texted on day 14. He said he'd heard things had gotten complicated and that he was sorry. She noticed he didn't say what he was sorry for, or whose side he was on, or whether he thought she had done anything wrong, but he reached out, and she appreciated it more than she expected to. 3 weeks after the call, her grandfather's attorney reached out to her directly. He said he had something he thought she should know. He told her that when her grandfather had updated his will 18 months before he died, he had also left a letter. Not a legal document, just a letter, addressed to Claire, to be given to her if anyone contested the will. Her grandfather, the practical man, the one who planned everything, the one who had watched his daughter manage situations for 30 years, had prepared for this. The letter was 3 paragraphs. She is not going to share all of it here, and I respect that completely. But she shared the last line. He wrote, "I know your mother will have things to say about this. She always does. But Claire, I need you to know that I was completely clear in my mind and in my heart when I made this decision. The house is yours because you showed up, not for what you could get, just to be there. That is the rarest thing I know." She read it standing in the kitchen. The morning light was coming through the window. Her coffee was on the counter. She stood there for a while. Then she sat down on the floor, right there in the kitchen, and she cried. Not because she was sad, not because she had lost anything, but because he had known. He had seen it coming and had prepared for it, the way he prepared for everything, and had thought to leave her something to hold on to when it happened. And he was not there anymore to tell him that it had worked, that she was okay, that she was staying. Before I get to where Claire is now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life take the fact that you were loved as evidence that something was wrong? Have you ever had a relationship that was real and meaningful and built over years, called manipulation, because it resulted in something someone else wanted? Leave a comment, because the responses on this post were not what I expected. The top comment had over 14,000 upvotes. It said she kept records for 7 months before anything happened. She was never reacting. She was always preparing. That's not pettiness. That's someone who knew exactly what was coming and chose to be ready. But the comment I keep coming back to was buried 300 replies deep. It had fewer than 400 upvotes. It said, "The grandfather knew. He wrote the letter. He prepared the documentation. He protected her before he was gone." That's not a property dispute. That's a man saying, "I love you" in the only language that would hold up in court. I've been thinking about that comment for weeks, because I think it names something that the rest of the story circles around without quite landing on. Her grandfather was not naive. He was not a man who misunderstood the dynamics of his own family. He had watched his daughter for decades. He understood exactly who she was and exactly what she was likely to do. And rather than pretend that wouldn't happen or hope that love would be enough to prevent it, he did what he always did. He made a plan. He documented everything. He prepared for the conversation he knew was coming, even though he wouldn't be there to have it. He taught Claire, without ever saying it directly, that preparation is not distrust, that keeping records is not paranoia, that knowing what is coming and being ready for it is not cynicism, it is clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is the thing that held up. Now, I want to talk about Claire's mother, because I think this story is too easy if the mother is just a villain. She is not just a villain. She is a woman who lost her father, who had, in all likelihood, expected that loss to come with a certain kind of inheritance, not just financial, but relational. The confirmation that she was central, that even in his final act, her father's most significant decision would pass through her, and instead it went around her, directly to her daughter. And what that felt like, beneath the legal threats and the phone calls and the 48-hour ultimatum, was probably something much simpler and much more painful. It felt like being skipped. Like her father had looked at the family and distributed his love and had given the largest portion to someone else. That is a specific grief. And I'm not saying it justifies anything. The attorney letter was real. The threats were real. The 7 months of quiet, organized pressure were real. The voicemail implying her grandfather was incompetent was real and was cruel and was wrong. None of that is justified by grief, but I think understanding it matters. Because the people who do this to us are almost never doing it from nothing. They are doing it from a wound they have not found a way to address directly. And when they aim that wound at us, we get to decide whether we absorb it or whether we hold our ground. Claire held her ground, not with rage, not with cruelty, with a document and an attorney, and a letter from a man who had loved her enough to prepare. Here's what I want to say to anyone watching this who sees themselves in Claire's position. You are allowed to inherit what you were given, not just the house, the relationship, the years of showing up, the Sunday afternoons, the ordinary Tuesdays, the presents that no one else offered. Those things are yours. And if someone tells you that being loved is a form of manipulation, if someone tells you that a relationship you built over years is somehow suspicious because of what it resulted in, I want you to hear this clearly. They are not describing your relationship. They are describing their own absence. And those are not the same thing. You are also allowed to keep records, not because you are paranoid, not because you are building a case, but because some of us grew up in families where the official version of events had a way of replacing the actual version, where conversations were revised in the retelling, where your memory of what happened was regularly questioned until you started questioning it yourself. Documentation is not aggression. It is clarity. It is the record that says, this is what was said, this is when it was said, this is what was meant. It is the thing that lets you trust your own experience. And you are allowed always to trust your own experience. One more thing. Some people in the comments called Claire cold, said she was clinical, said that reading a 27-item document to your mother on the phone was calculated and unkind. I want to address that directly. She did not write that document to use against her mother. She wrote it because she had spent 29 years in conversations that ended with her doubting what had happened in them. She wrote it so that this time she would know, so that when the call was over, she would have a record that matched her memory, that confirmed the pattern was real, that told her she was not imagining things. The document was not a weapon. It was a foundation. It was the thing she stood on when everything else was trying to move. Her grandfather had built the same thing for her. He had just been doing it for 4 years longer. Claire is still in the house. The legal challenge her mother filed went nowhere. Her grandfather's documentation was thorough. His attorney was prepared. The letter existed. There was nothing to contest. Her mother has not called on a Sunday in 2 months. Claire calls on Thursdays now. Short calls. Careful calls. Calls that don't go near the house or the will or the 48-hour ultimatum. They are not okay, but they are in contact. And Claire has decided, for now, that contact without resolution is what she has to offer. Not because she is pretending nothing happened, but because she is 30 years old and her grandfather is gone and her mother is still her mother and she is not yet ready to know what the final shape of that relationship is. She is giving it time. Not her mother's timeline, her own. Her uncle has not reached out. Her aunt sent a text last month that said simply, "The garden looks nice." Claire had posted a photo of it. It did look nice. She had figured out the spring bulbs. Her grandfather had always done tulips along the left side. She is keeping that. She is also adding something of her own in the back corner. Something she chose. A small thing, but hers. The house smells coffee. It's like coffee in the mornings and like wood and like the particular kind of October light that comes through the kitchen window and makes everything look warmer than it is. She is, by her own account, exactly where she is supposed to be. Leave a comment below. Has someone ever told you that being loved was suspicious? Have you ever kept records not to hurt anyone, but just to trust yourself? Have you ever had a relationship in your family that someone else called manipulation because they weren't part of it? I read every comment, every single one. If you're new here, this is what we do. We don't just read the story. We ask what it costs. We ask what it means. We ask what we can carry out of it into our own lives. If that's something you want more of, subscribe. It's free, and it means I can keep doing this. Next video. A woman discovers her in-laws have been making a duplicate key to her apartment for 3 years. She finds out because one of them is sitting in her living room when she comes home from work. She didn't call the police immediately. She sat down across from them, and she opened her laptop. See you in the next one.